Hi, it's Louise at Spiral Bright Insight. I'm in a slightly different location today. I'll be honest and tell you why. I often find if there's content that I'm feeling really drawn to share, but I kind of have some sort of block in terms of sharing it, I often find after a few attempts upstairs in my office that coming into a different space can help the flow. So that is my attempt here to bring forward what really wants to be shared, but there is some resistance. So very cryptic, I know. But if you are new to my channel, I am a galactic and intuitive astrologer, and I'm working increasingly with asteroids and different sort of dwarf planets, centaurs, all sorts of different cosmic bodies are coming into my awareness. And I'm finding that a lot of them have very strong connections and associations with myths, with stories that have been passed down through the ages, and sort of starting to sort of explore what makes a myth stand the test of time, what makes a story kind of important and precious enough to share, to be shared with so many people, and to sort of really be so significant, I guess. What is it that makes a myth so special? And what I'm seeing increasingly, what I'm understanding, is that the myths that stand the test of time are those that create a really strong emotional response and an emotional reaction. They inspire us. They help us to really start to imagine, how we fit into that story, how we might have a part of their archetype or their energy, their courage, their light, and how we can sort of apply our own experience and journey to and sort of weave that into that myth in some way. And it's usually the stories that either trigger fear or inspiration or joy or admiration that really do stand the test of time. But there's always a really strong emotional reaction. And my work as a galactic and intuitive astrologer, I am increasingly pulling in different myths, different stories to help really share insight as to what particular star or asteroid or archetype has to say. What is the wisdom? What is the message? And how is that showing up in the blueprint when I look at the chart? So this is quite a personal share for me. I want to share some insight that has come through working through some of my own transits in my natal chart, but I know that, or I'm being shown and called and encouraged to share this because I know it's not just wisdom for me. This has a place in the collective somehow, and there will be people hopefully that watch this that are going to have similar alignments in their chart and sort of almost need to hear the message. So this is for the collective, but it is quite personal, and in many ways it is like a sequel to other content that I have shared in the past. So what I'm working with is the story and the myth of Medusa, and previously I've always really focused on fixed star Algol, which is at 26 degrees give or take a few minutes in the zodiac, 26 degrees of Taurus. And I've shared insight about Medusa's story through Algol, and particularly in relation to Uranus transiting and the activations that come through Uranus aspecting Algol, which did happen earlier this year and last year. So there's a lot of wisdom coming through the story of Medusa for all of us, and I've explored that in previous videos, so I'm not going to repeat it here. I will share the links to my previous content in the description box below. I know that a lot of people who watch my channel did resonate with what came through in those earlier videos. So if you want to watch them again, or for the first time, I invite you to do that, because it's pretty cool what has been coming through in the way Medusa has been working with me for the past 18 months. And I shared with you last time, and I kind of put my neck on the line, excuse the pun, about being sort of labelled as a complete loon, but I was getting a real strong message that Medusa was coming in and saying, find my head, I want my head. And it was just like, what on earth do I do? How on earth do I find that? You know, what even is this about? Why me? Type thing. And I know a lot of people resonated with what I shared before, but it seems that the story wasn't quite finished, because although I thought I'd found her head and, you know, done some sort of integration work to reacquaint and reunite Medusa with her head, it turns out that, yeah, that wasn't the end of the story. And so just to give you a little bit of background before I go in and dive in to share more of this story, I've been working with a lot of transformative energies, a lot of strong transits in my chart. I had the Jupiter-Sirius Venus-A conjunction, Sirius-A Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer on my South Node, with the Sphinx transiting my North Node. Sphinx is still transiting my North Node at this time in Capricorn. The full moon in Aquarius was very strong in my chart, and, you know, the 8-8 energy of the peak of Lionsgate felt symbolic. I actually have got asteroid Medusa, which is different from Algol, and I see asteroid Medusa as representing the figure Medusa, sort of the complete original version of Medusa before she was turned into a monster. So the purity, the divine feminine, the wisdom, the priestess, sort of the oracle, you know, the intuitive, beautiful, pure, chaste type energy and archetype. But Medusa in my natal chart is at 15 degrees, 55 minutes of Leo. So at Lionsgate, as the sun, you know, was passing over that point in the chart, this is when, I guess, the activation started to happen. And we had, you know, this flurry of lots of exploration for me in terms of nervous system, feeling too much, not enough, with the whole Leo Aquarius axis being activated. Feeling safe within my body, you know, surges of energy, not knowing how to regulate my energy system, all sorts of things were coming up. Physical symptoms, grinding of teeth, headaches, neck issues. And again, you know, the body started talking to me quite insistently. And bit by bit, piece by piece, I was getting all sorts of clues. Lots of people were coming in to work with me through my client work as well. Lots of insight, lots of messages, lots of aha moments and understanding, which, you know, was remarkable. It felt like a real fast track, a real sort of series of very powerful and intense upgrades, having to face fears, having to pull back missing pieces, you know, move through a lot of witch wound stuff, which continues to be a big deal and a big part of my work, and, you know, and so on and so on. So we kind of, there was a lot of themes coming up around this time, but and again, you know, I'm so grateful to other people, you know, sharing their content, their ideas, their wisdom, their intuition, and their messages and insight, because it triggers and unlocks information for me. And this is what happened. Somebody that I follow on Instagram was talking about Medusa asteroid and saying she was in a particular transit, and when I went to look, she is incidentally asteroid number 149. If you want to look and see where she is in your chart, you can do that on astro.com, do an extended chart, and you can plot her asteroid number in to see where she lies in your natal chart. But at the time, she was at 26 degrees of Scorpio. And that was significant because she was in an exact opposition to fixed star Algol, facing her severed demon monster Gorgon head in the chart. What was even more significant, and that alone is enough for me to sort of pay attention, was that I'm checking my natal Sphinx, who had been talking to me loudly through all sorts of different avenues and sources, was also my natal Sphinx is at 26 degrees of Scorpio. So I was like, oh my goodness, Medusa's literally sitting on the Sphinx in my natal chart. You know, what is this riddle that I am being called to solve? You know, what's the answer? You know, is that what is this all about? And in the transit chart, the sun was at 26 degrees of Leo, opposing my natal sun at 25 degrees of Aquarius. So there was this huge convergence of fixed energy forming this grand fixed cross, combining my natal chart and the transit chart, creating this huge pressure and tension, which, yeah, let's say energetically, it was a lot. It was intense. And I find that when there is a fixed ground cross, particular with the tension, you know, this like stubborn energy grounding in, there's nowhere to go other than to the center, because all energies are sort of standing their ground, and it's almost like you have to go into the center to find that exit point. Or that is what it felt like to me. And I found myself sort of having to really take time to sit with and consider, you know, what happens when Medusa, who was so insistent with me earlier in the year that she wanted to find her head, and I thought I'd found it and integrated and reunited them, but clearly there was something else that I needed to explore. What happens with Medusa in Scorpio, which is the sign of depth, hidden secrets, transformation, shadow, you know, esoteric magic, taboo. What happens when she stands face to face with Algol, looking at her severed head? And yeah, the insight that came through was just wild. And the fact that the sun, both suns, natal and transit, were opposing each other, sort of shining a light, giving courage, boldness, you know, really kind of, it's time to come into all of yourself and really stand in your light and be seen, with the Aquarian energy as well, about liberation, setting us free from, I guess, ideas, mental patterns, as well as, you know, whatever was happening was for the collective as well. And like having to go into the center to really, I guess, sit with what on earth was going on. The Sphinx is there in the background as well, you know, timeless, ancient, very wise. A little bit of trickster energy comes through with the Sphinx, but it's like with the Sphinx, you have to be the hero in your own journey. You have to find the answer to the riddle. And ultimately it is about, the riddle of the Sphinx is about understanding that man, you know, is a cyclical journey. You know, it is to be human. There are all different stages in the journey, and it's about the wholeness of that journey and the completeness of it and the wisdom that comes through and all those different stages in life, and how, you know, that makes man. It's not just about one particular point in the journey, it's about the wholeness. And of course, with Leo being wholeness, there was a lot of sort of energies pointing to, you know, this is about retrieving parts of the self, missing pieces of the self, in order to come into wholeness, in order to have enough power and self-awareness and self-knowledge to move forward, to gain that access, to almost win the rite of passage to move forward into whatever comes next. And that is really what it felt like. Very intense, but also very intriguing and enlightening. So I just wanted to share kind of what was coming up, you know, as I sort of debated and sat with and considered and reflected on what, you know, what happens when Medusa faces the head. And of course, you know, just coming back to the myth, in myth, the story, we were told that if anyone who dared to look at Medusa and see her eyes and sort of fall within her gaze and her line of sight, would be instantly turned into stone. And I think I've explored this in the previous content, but, you know, for me, this really is about, I guess, a warning. Maybe it's prevention, maybe it's distortion, maybe it's like, don't look at her in the eyes. The eyes are a mirror to the soul, or a window to the soul. You know, you see yourself through the eyes, but they're also reflective. So often we see ourselves in someone else. You know, it's the whole cosmic mirror, the learning, the projection, the experiencing through another. And, you know, this kind of, don't look at the monster in the eyes. Don't look at her straight in sort of square in the eyes, because you will be you'll be petrified. You know, you will be turned to stone, numb, disconnected. You know, life force removed. And that's kind of what we've been told. And but metaphorically, it's like, this is about, you know, people not having the courage to see the truth of themselves, to see their full power, to step into all of themselves, because somehow they feel that if they look their power direct in the eye, if they see it, if they acknowledge it, if they bring it in, that somehow it's going to be too much, or that they are going to cause harm, that they are somehow a danger to other people. And again, this is what we've been taught. This is a program, people who are powerful can somehow, cause problems to the collective. And this is where the witch wound comes, and the exile and the alienation and the persecution wound and all of that. But ultimately, it's about, for those who weren't ready to see themselves, they would be turned to stone. And those who were, and again, the Sphinx is right behind me, saying if you are willing and have the courage to face your fear and to, I guess, ignore what the story, the myth of the story and what, you're being told might happen, if you've got the courage to stand on your ground and look and face the Gorgon, face the monster, face what fears you most, what's going to happen? And, can we shift the narrative? Can we actually see that by seeing ourselves and the truth of ourselves and our own power is actually the most liberating thing that we can do? It will empower us. It will take us to the next level. And that all of those who have not dared do it have, become numb and immobilized and not been able to move forward. But if we have the power and the courage to face the monster and to cut through the distortion and to change the narrative, what happens next? So here I am, back sort of working with a transit chart, sort of trying to feel into what this means and, thinking, okay, well, obviously this is another opportunity. I wasn't expecting it, but this is an opportunity for me to try and facilitate this process with Medusa and her head. They can reunite, we can sort this story, this situation once and for all. But what actually happened was unexpected. And again, this is where I might sound like I'm losing the plot, but it is all about metaphor and symbolism. I'm not suggesting that I am Medusa or that I am, in any way connected to her, but her archetype, there is an aspect of her that in me as in all of us. And so this was about sort of coming into the center, sort of with Medusa, and sort of taking the head, the severed head that has been cut off in its prime, the silenced, cut down, trying to disempower the divine feminine, all that sort of serpent energy, wisdom in the snake hair, and the eyes that continue to stone if you dare look at yourself and see your true self. All of that, I'm sort of thinking, okay, I'm just going to get his head, quite scary, and give it to Medusa, and then I can sort of take myself out of this situation, and there'll be an integration and it will be fine. But what actually happened was I had the head, tried to give it to Medusa, and she turned and walked away. She didn't want it, and I was like, okay, what do I do? And you might kind of know what's coming next, but I'm standing there with this head, obviously symbolically or energetically, wondering what on earth to do with it. And suddenly it became very clear. My neck started getting really hot. There was like all this kind of energy around my kind of throat chakra. I was like, I need to put this head on me. And again, it will sound crazy, but from a sort of insight and teaching perspective, this was about me integrating the parts of me that I had feared most, that I had cut off, that I had numbed myself to or not dared to look at. And what would happen if I suddenly became the monster? Would other people look at me and ultimately be harmed? Or was I able to show up, with all this kind of, or was I able to integrate the missing piece that I felt would create fear in others if I showed up in my true form and my true power? And again, I'm not saying that I'm Medusa to any extent, but this is how the vision, the teaching, the learning was coming through to me through a story and a message and a myth that I could relate to, that would create and trigger emotion in me, but also bring up all the fears. And, I think, as I was saying earlier, I think a lot of what we fear most is ourselves and our own power. but also what happens when we fully own it, when we fully stand in it. You know, are we going to cause harm? Because that may have happened in other timelines. Are people going to reject us, persecute us, harm us, because we are creating fear within them, because they're seeing aspects of themselves in us, in our mirror, that they're not ready to see, that make them feel uncomfortable. You know, there's so much about protection and projection here, but there's also about distortion, about who is the monster. You know, is what you have been taught or convinced yourself to fear, is it actually a monster, or is it just a part of yourself that you haven't been ready to see, that is desperate to be integrated, to love, to be accepted, but you've created kind of this whole story of fear around it in order to justify not bringing it in, you know, keeping it at arm's length, keeping it separated and severed. There's so many different sort of ways you can see this, but, you know, the minute I sort of started, you know, brought this energy in, this fearful part, this feared part of myself, and reattached it, and, you know, and had the courage to turn and look at someone else, you know, direct in the eye what was going to happen, and nothing happened. They didn't turn into stone. They weren't struck down. And actually, you know, the minute I was able to integrate the energy, again, I was shown that the sort of the snakes and the hair of Medusa, they've been completely out of control. And when I'm talking about nervous system overwhelm, it's like when there's too much energy flowing through and you're not fully anchored and you're not fully embodied, and that there is nowhere for that energy to go, there is no channel for it to move through, and yet it keeps coming, and that's happening to all of us. You know, it can create complete and utter chaos. And the minute that I was sort of able to reunite this missing piece and sort of see, you know, that this was an aspect that I had disconnected from, that I had feared, that was part of me, suddenly all that energy suddenly had a channel and an anchor and somewhere to go. And that wisdom suddenly could be reunited. And, you know, the throat chakra, it starts to be healed. And ultimately, it's about feeling safe in the body and being able to trust the body to hold the amount of energy that is coming through, to feel safe enough to, you know, trust that you are a container for these higher energies. And yes, it may sometimes feel overwhelming, but when you are pulling in all these missing parts, or these abandoned and rejected parts of yourself, you come into more wholeness. And this was a lesson for me. I'm a couple of weeks in. Obviously, I'm sharing this in retrospect. I've tried to do this video several times. As I said at the beginning, it's a difficult one to share, but it feels important. So I'm going to keep pushing on. I'm going to get there. I'm going to put it out. But, you know, it's about seeing those parts of the self that, you know, we weren't necessarily ready to see, we didn't want to see. But what happens when we do reintegrate, when we do pull all those pieces back, is we can step into who we were meant to be. We can claim our power. We can feel whole and full of the self. And when we're working with that energy, we don't need to worry about, you know, what other people are doing, or what's going on, or what they're going to think about you. So again, there's so many lessons in there. I think I put this in my latest energy update video. I've also been shown very strongly that with Jupiter in Cancer, you know, this is about us breaking out of the shell. We've tried to keep small, we've tried to stay safe, we've tried to stay hidden because we were trying to keep ourselves safe. It was a self-preservation technique. No, there's no judgment. But Jupiter is in Cancer is saying, no, we have to expand. We have to go beyond the container. We have to come in. We have to fill the space. We have to own the room. We have to become the leaders. And this is, you know, we can only do that if we bring all of the missing pieces back, and we see the true potential and our true power and our true, what is possible. And when we've got missing pieces hiding, or we're trying to, like, you know, not allow everyone to see all of what is, then there's going to be a disconnect. There's going to be a separation. There's going to be lack. There's going to be fear. There's going to be a fear of judgment, you know, all the stuff that we talk about regularly as part of the witch wound. And, you know, just coming back to, what does Algol represent? Yes, it's the monster. Yes, it's the parts of ourselves that we dare not look at, or we've been told not to look at. We've been told to look away, to not see the true self. But it's also, because we're working with Taurus energy, it's the parts that, or the fear or the emotions that have become stuck. If we think about Scorpio, there is flow. This is water, although we are talking with fixed energy. But in Taurus, it can become really stuck, really petrified, really solidified. And the mind, and the body rather, holds on to the emotions that we're not necessarily able to process or allowed to flow through, and also the mind, what the mind can't process and what can't make sense of. Often the body holds on, and it's like, you know, if I hold on, I will be safe. If I stay small and stay hidden, I will be safe. And again, this was such a big theme for me, and it's something that I continue to work with, but I just hope that this is resonating with some people who are watching it now. So I guess, you know, key messages here: it's time to break out of our shell, to come into the fullness of self, to reclaim the missing pieces, to trust in our body's ability to keep us safe, to handle the energy, to handle the power that we have, that all of us have, that each of us have. But it's also about sort of using the sort of descending, coming fully into the body, bringing back those missing pieces in order to be able to ascend. We have to come down and be embodied and grounded and anchor the energy in order to rise up and to ascend and to create this shift. And, you know, Medusa's story is about being frozen in fear, being petrified, unable to, being disempowered, being persecuted, losing the voice, you know. And again, with the kind of the teeth, the jaw, the grinding, that again has been an issue for me. It's about, you know, trying to hold on, trying to also feeling this restriction of the voice and the mouth, and not being able to allow the energy to flow through, but also the disconnect where the energies aren't quite moving through properly because they're not fully anchored in. And how ultimately, you know, a lot of the time the body is giving us feedback, and when we really give ourselves permission to sit down and talk and interact and listen to what the body has got to say, and we can start to weave in the transit charts and the energies in astrology, it is really quite remarkable what comes through. Ultimately, it's all metaphor, you know, it's not real per se, but it's the ideas, the images, and the understanding that comes through. The higher self uses these messages, these visions, these pictures, these stories to help us unlock the understanding that we need to access in order to move forward. So it's about telling ourselves that actually it is safe to be full and whole, it is safe to be seen, it is safe to stand in your power, and that, you know, this is part of what happens and what needs to happen moving forward. And we need to rewrite the story and cut through the illusion and the distortion of, you know, the demonized divine feminine and the demonized power, the kundalini, the serpent wisdom, that transformation, the mysticism and the wisdom. It is time for it all to come back in. So I hope you've enjoyed my story. I hope it's resonated. I don't know if there will be another sequel, whether that's the final chapter or not, we will see. But it was certainly very resonant for me. And I was called to come on and share. So let me know what you think, as always. If you think I'm crazy, just unsubscribe and move on. Sometimes we have to sort of, talk about crazy things. But it is what it is. So thank you so much for watching, for being with me and sharing this crazy ride. And I will be back soon, sending lots of love.